Now, yesterday, Bob told us just to forget everything, all the hard work, not the words, but all the hard work, and just come out and enjoy ourselves. So I'm going to have a little bit of fun. I like to break boundaries, so I've always been curious, what happens if you actually step off this thing? So here we go. I've heard that you actually disintegrate. Okay, I'm so good. All right. My favorite mountain quote is, "When in doubt, go higher." Now, the first rule of being lost in the mountains is not to go down, but to go up, to look out over the terrain, to gain perspective, and to find the best way down. Now, the mountains have always been symbolic of strength, perseverance, mystery, and majesty. Having lived 25 years in Colorado, the mountains for me were my refuge and my inspiration. Now, Colorado is home to 58 peaks over 14,000 feet high. So I had my pick of adventure, and I managed to climb them all 3 times. Plus repeats, I've stood on the top of nearly 250 peaks. And I tell you, words simply cannot describe the exhaustion and the elation that one feels over those last few steps before standing on top. The only thing more fulfilling is guiding people to the top and watching them experience it for the first time. And my most treasured moments were standing on top with my own children. But even more inspiring over those years was the opportunity I had to meet thousands of children living in poverty all over the world. Their stories of survival made my personal and physical mountains seem so small. I worked with child laborers in Cairo, little girls trafficked for sex in the Philippines, AIDS orphans in Zimbabwe and Swaziland, and young kids sucked into the gangs of Central America. All tragic stories of histories lost. And now the inspiration continues with my work as president of Horizon, a nonprofit based in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. We currently work in Kenya and Guatemala, and we exist to empower orphan children to be self-sustainable. And we want to radically transform the way orphan children are cared for. And we want that transformation to be global and to work to influence others to do the same. Now, for me, climbing mountains has always been a metaphor for what orphan children go through every day of their lives. And that's what led me to create this absolutely crazy thing I call 14 14ers in 14 days. Now, you have to climb 14,000-foot peaks in 14 days on behalf of at least one child. I wanted to raise awareness of their situation, but also create a challenge that would push me and others beyond what we thought we were capable of doing, a decision an orphan child has to make every day. Now, for me, it pushed me to my very limit. For example, about a year ago, approaching the 14th peak on the 14th day, it was literally like my brain was disconnected from my feet. I can still remember it very well. I looked down and I could see my feet, but I had to will them to move. Only the mental images of the children pushed me to the top. And it was then that I realized, you know, it's not just about what I do for them, but it's more of a symbiotic relationship in which my humanity depends on them just as much as theirs depends on me. When we feel we've reached our end, we enable each other to carry on. But rarely do the ideas and inspirations of life reach down to those who have lost everything. Viktor Frankl, a concentration camp survivor, wrote, "Being human always points to something or someone other than oneself. And by giving himself to a cause to serve or another person to love, the more human he is." I think at Horizon our true purpose is simply to connect humanity. For when we restore the identity and the belonging of orphan children, I think the more human we become. Imagine the unimaginable. Tragedy strikes and suddenly your own children have lost the only sense of belonging they've ever known. To belong is to be human, and when you lose one, you lose the other. Everybody needs to belong. And so I'm sure, like me, you would do anything you could to ensure that your children continue to have their sense of belonging. In a poem written by Horizon children, they describe themselves as having been the laughing stock of their community. Should any child, let alone an orphan child, ever have to feel that type of isolation or rejection? But the children I'm talking about today have no one to sign the papers, no family's going to come along, and they won't be adopted. Listen, no one is born an orphan. An orphan is the result of tragic loss. It leads to a sense of permanent exclusion. But not only exclusion, double tragedy. For if they are not trafficked, they will most likely end up spending the rest of their lives on the street, in prison, or in prostitution. In fact, the true tragedy of orphan care is that every 2.2 seconds, an orphan child is forced to leave the only care they've ever known. For a second time, they lose their sense of belonging. And after they blow out 18 candles, 70% of the boys will end up hardened criminals, and 60% of the girls will be trapped in prostitution, having babies of their own. Babies who will most likely end up being orphaned themselves. Orphans having orphans, and the tragic cycle continues. It is estimated that there are over 140 million orphan children in the world trapped in that cycle. That is roughly equivalent to how many mailboxes there are in the entire United States. Remember that quote at the beginning, when in doubt, go higher? Well, I know there is much good going on. I believe orphan care has lost its way and it went down to find it. I think it's time to climb back up to the top and look for a better way. And at Horizon, I believe we have found a better way that will inspire not only ourselves but others to radically transform the way orphan children are cared for. Now at Horizon, it all begins in what we call a micro-community. Now we Americans are no strangers to this concept. We have areas of 55-plus communities. We have neighborhoods for young families. We have communities where certain groups can thrive in their uniqueness without feeling isolated or ostracized. I like to think of a micro-community as a real neighborhood where there are families, where there is farming going on, where business is being conducted, and where skills are being taught, and where there's lots of play and life connection to the surrounding community through schooling and outings, and with neighbors who understand that these children need to belong and are willing to welcome them into their lives. Research shows that orphan children who are raised in a family setting have better outcomes than those who are forcibly sent to biological family or put in foster care, where the settings are more deprived. Turns out it's less about where an orphan child is raised and more about the quality of care that they receive. Now, in a micro-community, each child has a very strategic plan for their lives, just like any parent would want for the success of their children. It's that better way that we have found, and it's best captured in what we call the 10 declarations of transformative orphan care. All of our children go through a very extensive investigation process before they come to us to confirm that they have no other option. There is no family and there's no adoption option. All of our children come to us through the court system. A judge has to sign a paper giving Horizon legal custody. And I mentioned the importance of belonging in family. At Horizon, a family is a mother and a father. We believe it's critical for their development that they have both parents. And the micro-community environment I mentioned does everything it can to minimize and eliminate all forms of institutionalization. Each child has all the documentation and all the proof that they need to be able to enjoy the privileges and the benefits and the responsibilities of being citizens in their own country. And it's critical we impact all areas of their lives, physically, cognitively, socially, emotionally, and even spiritually. And in those areas, we have measurable outcomes to make sure that what we are doing has long-term impact. And at Horizon, there is no leaving. They stay closely connected to family, where they transition into adulthood, learning to stand on their own with purpose and with hope. And each young adult has the opportunity to select from one of 3 tracks in our inheritance program. They can select academics, vocational technical, or start their own business. And this is not just about what they receive, but learning how to give. They have opportunities for service and for giving back and helping pave the way for children to come after them. And finally, we don't want long-term dependency on outside funding. So we work in the local markets to create businesses that will provide enough income to sustain the operations of the micro-community. Now, the question we must ask ourselves is, does it work? And I say absolutely yes, it does. 80% of our young adults have succeeded in breaking their cycle of poverty. Let me repeat that. 80% of our young adults have succeeded in breaking their cycle of poverty. That compares to the normal statistic where only 20% succeed. We have young adults who have become teachers and nurses and pastors and farmers, business owners, bankers, accountants, beauticians, electricians, and many others. And here's another success story. In the next 5 to 7 years, our operations in Kenya will be self-sustaining. And soon we hope to open our first micro-community in Guatemala. We will inspire change by working with the government to use this model to encourage others to improve their care rather than be closed down. Now, I'll be the first to admit that we have a long way to go. But as one of my heroes, Nelson Mandela, once said, there is no easy walk to freedom anywhere. And many of us will have to pass through the valley of the shadow of death again and again before we reach the mountaintop of our desires. If you're going to climb that mountain, or any mountain, you have to take that first step. We extended the metaphor to Mount Kilimanjaro, not far from where our children are from. And while we couldn't take them with us, we took their handprints to the top on this banner to symbolize that this climb to freedom is for them, and for thousands of others we hope to reach by the year 2030. And finally, my other favorite mountain quote is this: success is not counted by how high you have climbed, but by how many people you brought with you. It's all about connecting our shared humanity so that orphaned children can find refuge and inspiration to go higher and higher until they too can stand on the mountaintop of their desires. Thank you very much.